All right, get ready because today we are diving deep into the science of sexual attraction.
Ooh, exciting.
Yeah, you sent over this lecture, and I gotta say, I am really curious to unpack this. It combines biology and psychology and even social cues.
Yeah, it's kind of like a puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we all experience attraction, but we rarely stop to think about like what's actually happening.
Right, we're going way past the butterflies and your stomach stuff. Why are we drawn to certain people and not others? Is it all looks, or is it more complicated than that?
Well, let's start with something that you might not even realize you're picking up on. Pheromones. Those invisible chemical signals. They're more powerful than we think. You know that nature study about women unconsciously preferring the scent of men with complementary immune systems?
Yeah.
That's nature's way of making sure we have healthy offspring.
Wait, are you saying I might be subconsciously sniffing out a good immune system?
It's more common than you think. But it's not just pheromones at play here. Our brains are also working hard, especially the reward system. When we meet someone who we're interested in, our brains release dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin.
So those fireworks I feel, that's not just me being dramatic.
Not at all. It's the same chemicals involved in pleasure and addiction, which is why we feel that euphoric rush.
Wow. You know, in the lecture, there was that story about John meeting Sarah at the party.
Oh, yeah.
It's a perfect example of what we're talking about. His brain was going crazy. It's almost like when you get a song stuck in your head, but it's like a person.
Yeah, I like that. But let's not forget about evolutionary psychology. Things like facial symmetry and a healthy physique are often seen as attractive because they might signal good genes.
Interesting.
There was that study in psychological science where people consistently rated symmetrical faces as more appealing.
So we're programmed to look for healthy mates. I mean, makes sense, right?
Yeah, that's the theory at least. But there is some debate about how much of this is actually hardwired versus how much is shaped by culture.
Of course.
What's considered beautiful in one society can be totally different in another. Biology might give us a starting point, but society adds its own layers of complexity on top of that.
So it's nature and nurture working together.
Exactly. And speaking of psychology, I thought the section on the halo effect was really fascinating. It's like this bias where our overall impression of someone, especially their attractiveness, influences how we judge their other traits.
Yeah, that really surprised me. It's like if we see someone as attractive, we're more likely to assume they're also intelligent or kind, even if we don't really know.
It's true. Research shows that attractive people often get better opportunities, from job interviews to social interactions. Have you ever found yourself making assumptions about someone based on their looks?
You know, now that you mention it, I think I have.
It's like our brains are taking shortcuts.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about attachment styles. The lecture went into how our early relationships with caregivers can affect our romantic relationships later in life.
Yeah, those early experiences can have such a lasting impact. Someone with a secure attachment style might approach relationships with more trust and openness, while someone with an anxious or avoidant style might struggle with intimacy or commitment.
The stories about Emma and Mark really showed this.
Right. Emma, with her secure attachment style, just navigates relationships so easily. And then Mark, who's avoidant, has a harder time.
It makes you wonder how much of attraction is based on the other person and how much is our own baggage. But we can't forget about reciprocity. There's something so magnetic about being attracted to someone who's also attracted to us.
Reciprocity is huge. Social psychology research shows that we're naturally drawn to those who show interest in us. It creates this positive feedback loop.
So you're telling me if I have a crush on someone, they might actually like me back just because I like them.
It's possible.
Mind-blowing. Okay. But even with all these personal factors, our social environment also shapes our attractions. We've got to talk about that.
Definitely. I mean, just think about it. You're more likely to be attracted to someone you see often like a classmate or coworker, or even that barista at your favorite coffee shop.
Right. That's the propinquity effect in action.
Exactly. And then shared interests also play a role. Remember Sarah and Ben from the lecture?
Yeah, they met in that pottery class.
Right. They connected because of their shared love of art. It might not have happened otherwise.
It's like finding your tribe, but in the romantic sense.
Yeah. But we also have to address culture. Cultural norms and societal standards really impact what we see as attractive. What's considered desirable can change drastically from one culture to the next.
It really makes you think how much of this is universal and how much is totally relative.
It's the big question, right? Some things like facial symmetry seem to be universally appealing, but preferences for body size or skin tone or even personality traits can be completely different.
Wow. Okay, so we've got this mix of biology and culture, but then we add social media on top of that.
Right. Social media has completely changed the landscape of dating and relationships. We can connect with more people than ever before, but it also means we're presenting a carefully curated and often idealized version of ourselves.
Yeah, it's that whole highlight reel effect. Everyone is showing their best selves online, which can create unrealistic expectations.
Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in comparing ourselves to these perfect online personas. Have you ever felt pressure to present a certain image online?
Oh, absolutely. I have to remind myself that what I'm seeing is just a tiny part of reality.
It's like everyone's trying to sell something, including themselves.
Totally. Okay, so we've covered those heavier topics, but the lecture also talked about some of the more fun parts of attraction, like humor. Turns out, making someone laugh can be a powerful tool.
It really is. It can break the ice, it can signal intelligence, and it can create intimacy. That study where women rated humorous men as more attractive just shows you the power of a good laugh.
Makes sense. Who doesn't love to laugh, right? Makes you feel good, you connect with someone.
Exactly. And usually, if you find someone's jokes funny, it means you see the world in a similar way.
Right. But of course, attraction isn't all fun and games. The lecture also talked about vulnerability and how it helps us build deeper connections.
Yeah, vulnerability is really important. It can be scary, but sharing your fears or dreams or insecurities can make you feel closer to someone.
It's about finding the right balance, being authentic, but also protecting yourself.
It's like walking a tightrope.
hmm
You don't want to share too much too soon, but you also don't want to hold back entirely.
It's tough. And then there's the attraction selection model, which says that we tend to be attracted to people who are similar to us.
Right. It explains why we might like people who have similar values or beliefs, or even a similar level of attractiveness.
But it also kind of makes me think, are we just staying in our comfort zones? Are we missing out on connecting with people who are different?
It's a good point. We also can't forget about gender norms. All those societal expectations about masculinity and femininity have a huge impact on how we express and experience attraction.
Yeah, we still have that idea that men should be the ones pursuing women and women should be more passive.
Right, and that can lead to some unequal power dynamics. We need to challenge those old scripts.
Absolutely. Okay, before we wrap up, we've got to talk about age and maturity too.
Of course, as we get older, our priorities change, and that changes what we find attractive. Research shows that older individuals often care more about things like emotional stability and shared values.
Which makes sense. You learn what's really important in a partner as you get older.
Exactly. But even with all this knowledge about the science of attraction, there's still so much we don't know.
Absolutely. It's not like a formula you can just plug into. There's some kind of magic to it.
Right. We're not robots. There's something special about that spark of connection that you can't really explain.
Exactly. I guess that's what keeps it interesting.
Exactly. It's a
Wow.
complex tapestry of biology, psychology, and social influences, and then you add in individual experiences and desires.
And each person is different.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about pheromones and brain chemistry and even evolution, but what about like our social world? How does that influence attraction?
Oh, it plays a huge role. Think about it. We're more likely to develop feelings for someone we see all the time, like, someone in our class or someone we work with, or even like that barista you always see at the coffee shop.
Right, that's the propinquity effect, right. The lecture talked about that study where people were more likely to be friends with people who lived close by.
Exactly. Proximity is a big deal. And it's not just being physically close. Shared interests also matter a lot. Remember the story about Sarah and Ben meeting in the pottery class?
Yeah, they totally hit it off.
Their love of art sparked a connection that might not have happened otherwise.
It's like finding your people, but in a romantic way.
Yeah. Okay, but let's talk about something really important, culture. Different cultures have different ideas about what's considered attractive.
It's crazy how much our environment shapes what we think is beautiful.
I know, right? I mean, are there any universal standards of beauty? Or is it all relative?
That's a big question. The lecture talked about how facial symmetry seems to be pretty universally appealing.
Yeah, that's true.
But things like body size or skin tone, even personality preferences, those can vary a lot.
It's a mix of biology and culture. And then, of course, we have to talk about social media. It's like a whole other level of influence.
Yeah, social media has changed everything. It's amazing how many people we can connect with, but it also means we're presenting a very specific version of ourselves online.
It's all about the highlight reel. It's easy to compare yourself to other people who seem to have these perfect lives.
It can be hard to remember that what we see online isn't the whole picture.
Exactly. It's important to be realistic about social media. It can be a great tool, but it can also set us up for disappointment.
Totally. Okay, so we've talked about some of the more serious stuff, but the lecture also went into some lighter topics, like humor.
Oh, yeah. Humor is important. It can be a big factor in attraction.
Turns out making someone laugh is a pretty good strategy.
I mean, who doesn't like to laugh, right? It
Eh,
makes you feel good, and it can help you connect with someone.
And usually if you think someone is funny, it means you have things in common.
Exactly. You see the world in a similar way. But attraction isn't all fun and games. The lecture also talked about vulnerability and how that plays a role in building deeper connections.
Sharing your fears or dreams, it can feel risky, but it can also make you feel closer to someone.
You have to find that balance, though, being open and honest, but also protecting yourself.
Yeah, it's not easy. And then we have this thing called the attraction selection model.
Right, which basically says we're drawn to people who are similar to us.
It explains why we might like people who share our values or even our level of attractiveness, but it also makes you think, are we limiting ourselves?
It's a valid point. Are we just staying in our comfort zone? Maybe we're missing out on connecting with people who could teach us new things.
That's true. And of course, we can't forget about gender norms.
I know, those expectations about how men and women should behave, they really affect how we approach dating and relationships,
We still have this idea that men should do the pursuing and women should be more passive.
which isn't always fair. It would be great to see more balance.
Definitely. Okay, last but not least, we have to talk about age and maturity. How do those things affect attraction?
Well, as we get older, our priorities change, right? Research suggests that older people might care more about things like emotional stability and shared values,
It makes sense. You start to figure out what's really important to you.
and what you need in a partner. Even with all we've learned about the science of attraction, it's still kind of a mystery.
It is. You can't just reduce it to a formula. There's that special something, that spark, that's hard to explain.
Totally. It's a fascinating mix of biology, psychology, and social factors. Plus, each individual has their own unique set of desires and experiences.
It's complicated, but I guess that's what makes it so interesting.
I think so.
So when we've explored a ton about the science behind attraction, but it still feels like there's this, like, I don't know, mystery to it all.
It is kind of mysterious, isn't it?
Yeah.
We know so much about the science,
Yeah.
the pheromones, the brain chemistry, all that,
Yeah.
but we still can't fully predict who we're going to fall for.
Right. It's not like a math equation or something.
Exactly. We're not just robots reacting to stimuli.
We have all these experiences and desires and that thing, that spark, that's so hard to explain.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that's a good thing. It keeps things interesting.
It does. So where do we go from here? I mean, we've learned a lot, but how can we actually use this information?
I think the biggest thing is that it helps us make better choices in our relationships.
Hmm.
When we know how attraction works, we can understand our own patterns better.
And maybe break some bad habits.
Exactly. We can spot those red flags early on. Like we've talked about the halo effect, right?
Yeah.
Knowing about that can help us look beyond just physical appearance.
And make sure we're focusing on the qualities that actually matter.
All right. And thinking about attachment styles can also help us choose partners who are a good fit for us.
Avoid those toxic relationships.
Exactly. And of course, remembering what we talked about with social media can help us stay grounded.
Not get caught up in those unrealistic expectations.
Right. It's all about using this knowledge to build healthier and happier relationships.
But it's also important to remember that attraction is a journey. Our preferences can change over time.
Oh, absolutely. What we find attractive in our 20s might be totally different from what we find attractive in our 40s.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's all part of growing and evolving as a person.
Exactly. I guess the key is to be open to new experiences, but also stay true to yourself and what you're looking for in a partner.
I like that. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the science of sexual attraction. It's been a wild ride.
It has. I always learn something new when we do these deep dives.
Me too. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we hope you keep exploring this fascinating world of human connection.
It's definitely worth thinking about.
Absolutely. Until next time.